it's hard to accept that you have been complicit in a mass murder, in a genocide. You don't want to admit that to yourself. So your first reaction is going to be, that's not real.
Scott, what if I told you that it was possible to be both secular and Catholic and queer and progressive and pro-life? What would you say?
Is there something you want to tell me?
No, not me, but
Let's just be clear.
yeah,
But it
today's
is
guest.
possible.
It is
Okay.
possible. Today's guest uses all of these descriptors and more to
That's
describe herself.
that is a lot of adjectives.
Yeah, and the work that she does in it. This is a fascinating conversation. Welcome everyone to Dear Jane and the conversations that Scott and I have. We're excited that you're along for the ride. I think people are going to really have some nuggets that they can take from today's conversation. Stick around to the end because Elise gives some really good pointers for maybe you're concerned about losing a friendship or losing part of your community if you talk about being pro-life. And she has some good thoughts for that. So I hope people enjoy our conversation today with our guest, Elise Ketch. She does a lot of work with progressive anti-abortion uprising. She does some consulting with secular pro-life. She's done work with David Deliaden. She does nonviolent protesting at abortion clinics and just has fascinating thoughts on the whole debate related to abortion. So
Don't forget to subscribe, to comment, to like, to share, follow us on the socials. All of those things help spread the word. We're having unconventional pro-life conversations, just like this one with Elise today on Dear Jane.
Elise, thanks so much for joining us today. To kick us off, I would really love your thoughts on this question. Why should all progressives be pro-life?
Well, one progressive value is the protection of life itself, believe it or not. The question is just, when does that life begin? Specifically, when does that personhood begin? When do you have a person with a valuable life? And if you think that it begins at conception, in my opinion, it's because we all have an inherent and active relation with like our collective humanity that makes us people. If you believe that makes us people at conception, then your values as a progressive say protect life. So very easily you translate to, okay, now I'm a pro-life progressive.
So how do we get more progressives to believe that life begins at conception?
I think we need really good secular education on personhood personally. I am a kind of a personhood philosopher, an armchair philosopher, if you will. So I've studied a lot about this, and you need a really good argument that addresses why fetuses and embryos aren't just potential people. And it can't just be that they're biological organisms and all human organisms are people. That's a great start. That has to be the foundation of the argument, like with a scientific evidence. But once you have that evidence, you have to explain why that evidence makes you people in a way that addresses the metaphysical aspect of it, which starts to get a little more complicated. It's hard to explain entirely in a short pitch on a podcast unless you really want me to go into it. But we start with a really good educational component. And then the other side of it is connecting with people viscerally. So you have to show them victim imagery, and you have to teach them embryology. You have to show them that these babies are way more developed than they think they are when they're being aborted. Because that helps them just understand the connection between their development and their personhood. And then you also have to show them the violence. If they perceive the violence, they're more likely to understand why abortion is so wrong, and then to see these fetuses and embryos as victims and as people. And then the last thing is you've got to touch their hearts somehow, which I find has to be through a meaningful encounter with the preborn. And there's different ways to do this. My favorite way is through rescue. So I know you guys are supportive of rescue, and I appreciate that. My cat's coming over to say hi. So rescue is an encounter with the preborn through us. So we embody the preborn when we put ourselves in their place between the abortionist and the victim. Then we take on some of the violence that was meant for the victims, and we then show the people around them that these are people that we're trying to protect, because you don't make these sacrifices and take on violence for things that aren't people. You don't do that for things. You don't do that for ideas. You don't do that for potential people. You do that for real, actual people. So I think that in that way, rescue has a very moving, change hearts aspect to it. But you got to do it the right way. You can't be too aggressive about it. You can't be in people's faces. You gotta have that nonviolent stance and posture when you're doing it.
So let's talk about that. You have a book, Rebuilding Pro-Life Nonviolence. What do you mean by that? Do you mean like nonviolent protesting, or what are you drilling at there?
So specifically, we're talking about nonviolent protests, yeah, but not as in peaceful protest, as in disruptive protest that disrupts the violence directly, so direct action. And we're also looking specifically at civil disobedience in that book. So talking about why you need to challenge unjust laws and how to do that. And at this point, any laws that protect the people who violate the preborn and don't protect the preborn are unjust laws. So morally, we don't have an obligation to obey those laws. So it's actually an act of justice to disobey them.
It would take a lot of courage. We talked to Herb Garrity here recently, imprisoned for kind of what we're talking about here. It takes a lot of courage to do that. What's it look like when it's done well and most effective? I mean, what are some examples you can think of through history?
Right. Well, I think the very first rescue was done very well and effectively, believe it or not. The only critique I have is that they didn't have enough media attention, I guess. But the first rescue was put on by Chris Mooney and Tom Mooney, and also Burke Belch. And then, Tom Mooney and Burke were just there for support and to help train. They stepped out for the actual rescue part and let all these women, it was 8 women, do it. And I think 6 women were arrested. And eventually convicted. They were given a trespassing charge. And they went in there, they sat peacefully, they really did a hippie sit-in from the 60s, because that's where Chris and Tom's background were anti-war sit-ins in their college days. So they brought that to the pro-life movement, to their anti-abortion cause. And I think that's a great example of how to do it right. I think another good example is the rescue that recently happened in Tennessee. And I think that was Operation Save America, right? And they did just a good, solid sit in front of the doors in the hallway, pray, sing, and come off as nonviolent as possible. And I think that that was a very effective rescue as well. So there's some good examples. I also have a few not good examples, but we don't have to go into those. Yeah.
One of the things that I hear you say, I hear others say who are involved in this type of protest or rescue, is we really have to humanize the unborn. I think about other civil rights movements or other anti-slavery, things like that. It really took humanizing the victims of those injustices for people to kind of wake up and get on board. One of the things we talk about a lot is just the outright denial of people that late-term abortions happen or that partial birth abortions happen. Why do you think people deny that, even when we have evidence? I mean, there's the Justice for the 5 campaign. There's so much evidence, sadly, that partial birth abortions and late-term abortions happen. Why do you think those are hard for people to believe that they actually happen?
I think some of it is just denial. It's a coping mechanism with information that is very abrasive and hard to accept. Especially, it's hard to accept that you have been complicit in a mass murder, in a genocide. You don't want to admit that to yourself. So your first reaction is going to be, that's not real. That's not really happening. Even when presented with all the evidence, you're going to go into denial. Then there's some other very sophisticated mental blocks, just thinking that the person who's presenting the evidence is bigoted and you're not like that person, therefore their evidence can't be credible. It's so that we call that the, I forget what we call it, never mind. But some other things the evidence was presented all at once might be a problem. They just get overwhelmed, even though that might be the best way to do it sometimes. I have more to say on this, but I'm blanking. I'm sorry.
So I'm always curious. We love talking to people who are sort of considered non-traditional pro-lifers, if you will. I've seen some of the, you call yourself a leftist pro-life activist. How did you become pro-life? How did this become so important to you?
How did I become pro-life? Well, it started when I was born Catholic and I was raised as a cradle Catholic. So I've always been pro-life, but there was a time where I really questioned it. And that was in college, where I said, I do support the separation of church and state. And if I can't come up with a good reason outside of my religion that we should be against abortion, then I probably shouldn't be against abortion. So I was like, but I don't believe that. And I really did my research. I found secular pro-life who had a ton of evidence against the pro-choice claims that were being made. And that made me realize, oh, wait, I can be a secularist and be pro-life. I can be my whole self. I can be religious, secularist, and pro-life all at once and not go back on any of my values. So that brought me into just being comfortable in calling myself pro-life. But then what brought me into the movement more was hearing that Dobbs was about to happen and going, I'm in a leftist circle. If I don't start showing up as myself, and I am uniquely positioned to do this because I look a certain way and I talk a certain way, and I can reach out to the other side, being the left, I can reach out to the left and can show them why their values are in alignment with being pro-life. If I don't say something, then I am being complicit in this as well. So I started speaking out on it to my friends and just my social circles, and lost a lot of friends. But then I started showing up at protests, and that made me more friends. I made a lot of friends with progressives that are pro-life, and then from there just kept getting more and more involved. Eventually made a little zine about it called A Young Femme Gay Leftist Handed You This Pro-Life Zine, and that went kind of viral on Twitter, so that got me more involved. And then definitely Justice for the Five sparked something in me as well. That made me more adamant than ever that later abortion, of all things, needs to be banned. Like, that should be so obvious to everyone. And why is it not banned nationally? So on a federal level, I still don't understand why it's not. And we're working on that.
I have a theory that a lot of progressives are pro-abortion or pro-choice. We'll use their terminology. Just because they haven't really thought it, they think they should be. They think that, this is probably just where I should be. And they haven't really thought it through. They haven't thought of the ramifications, all the things that are tied to abortion, like, increased sex trafficking and domestic violence and all these other things. What do you think about my theory? You think there's anything to it?
Oh, yeah, I think there's merit to that. What I was going to say earlier was the name of that is snobbery first. So you have to get over the snobbery of these other people are bigoted, and you have to humanize yourself first to them and say, I'm someone you can trust, and you can trust what I'm telling you about things like later abortion. And then you have to go and you have to start teaching them about the bigger implications of the industry. They don't understand that there's an industry that is fueling abortion. And I think that's one of the hardest parts of the worldview to overcome, is they think that these are isolated incidents, maybe happening in hospitals, only happening for very difficult reasons for the most part. They don't realize this is a commodity that is being driven by this capitalist institution. And what's funny about progressives especially is, like, a lot of them are against, like, big corporations and stuff, and then they're like, but yay, Planned Parenthood. I'm like, you don't see the connection? So I think, yeah, it comes down to like they really haven't thought about it in that way ever before. They lack the education about it, and a lot of them just haven't ever considered it to be a big deal. Like one of my ex-partners was pro-choice, and I didn't know this when I first started dating them because they were Catholic, and I assumed they were pro-life until they told me they weren't, and I was like, what? That's actually what then led to my crisis about whether or not I was pro-life. And when I asked them, why are you pro-choice? They said, I just don't think it's a big deal. And what they really meant, what I realize now, is that they don't think fetuses and embryos are people. So a clump of cells, just getting rid of it is not a big deal. Like, it's just whatever. And that was totally abhorrent to me. So I think that a lot of them just haven't thought past their assumption that like this isn't a big deal. These are just clumps of cells, and they don't think they have to because they're in these circles where they're very isolated.
Right.
They're in their little echo chambers, you know.
Right.
They're not being challenged on it. So when someone like me comes up, they really hate me because I'm challenging them for the first time on it. But I've seen some people convert, so that's really exciting. I don't know if I've ever saved a baby, but I know I've changed a mind, and that's really
That's good.
supportive.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah. Yeah, it all contributes. I want to get back to, for a minute, this discussion about there being an abortion industry, because we know that it feeds the sex trafficking industry. We know about the domestic violence aspect of this. I think the other side that people really have a hard time believing is all of the fetal organ harvesting and research that goes on. So I know you've done some work with David Deliaden, who is one of my pro-life heroes for all the work that he's done exposing that side of the industry. But can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, this research is happening at universities in their research departments. So to kind of shed some light on that side of the abortion industry.
Yeah, I'd love to. I love David. I love working with him. So one of the things we found recently is these documents that David got through public records requests that show that Planned Parenthood is willing to harvest from babies that are viable up to 24 weeks, non-anomalous, which means healthy, and possibly harvest from them alive because from the emails we saw, the procedures they're doing are not in accordance with like regulations or other facts that would provide evidence of like a regular D&E, DNX dilations and evacuations. It's more in alignment with a partial birth abortion or just a whole birth and infanticide. And that's really terrifying stuff. I mean, again, that comes down to this should be nonpartisan. Why do more people not care about this? And it's going back into that denial aspect I was talking about. But there's more than just denial. And I want to touch on this again now that I remember my train of thought from earlier. There's a propaganda industry behind it too. So people have been propagandized and been brainwashed into believing that later abortion and these partial birth abortions and these infanticides aren't happening. They really don't want to believe they're happening, and the propaganda backs it up. And then there's an industry paying this all off. So that's the worst part. And the industry pays it off because they make money from selling these baby parts to institutions. That's the other thing they found in the public records request is that besides harvesting, they are then profiting by giving these to institutions and then accepting large donations at galas or accepting intellectual property that they then profit off of later. So they're not directly profiting, but they're making these indirect profits, which is illegal. It is. They're trying to do it legally in like these sidestep ways, but ultimately a profit is a profit. This is something that the government should be investigating and shutting down.
It's interesting. It just the more you pull back the layers on one part of the industry, the darker and more evil you realize it is. And from my perspective, I think that's why we don't see a lot of, or government officials don't get involved, or others don't get involved. It's because it's once you pull back one layer, you're going to start pulling back other layers and exposing other things, and they don't want to shut it down. They don't want to They don't want us to recognize babies at 24 weeks and ban late term abortions or anything like that, because then that's going to have people asking questions. And eventually, if we do that enough, then we can shut the whole industry down, which obviously they don't want to
Well,
do.
and I would tell progressives that it's just like, big oil, for example, how they, there's so much money to be made that there are people willing to invest significant amounts of money to control the narrative. It's the exact same thing. It's really no different. That it's like you said. All these. A lot of times, people will get fired up about big corporate, pharma or whatever, which one they want to choose. This is the exact same thing. There's tons of money to be made, and so there are going to be a long line of people willing to invest because of the return on their investment.
Absolutely. And I think that, again, that comes back to be in alignment with our progressive leftist principles. We have to recognize these things and then be against them and try to dismantle them to abolish the industry. Because this is another point I come back to, and pro-lifers love to say this, but we all know that the industry was founded in eugenics and founded by a eugenicist. And, you'll hear leftists say, like, abolish the police because they're founded in racism. Then why shouldn't we abolish the abortion industry? It's founded in eugenics. It's the same thing. And it's perpetuating the same kind of violence. Like, I mean, if you're a leftist and you see police violence and you're against police brutality, and then you see police cover-ups happening, you need to look especially at rescues and justice for the five. Rescues, because there was so much brutality against pro-lifers back in the day, especially in the 90s. We have lots of documented evidence of, officers snapping people's bones sometimes during rescues, where they're being completely nonviolent and just going limp, and then they just snap them. What? And then things like Justice for the Five, where it's very clear that the DCPD completely covered up what happened, the Metropolitan Police. It's such an obvious cover-up because they don't want to challenge the narrative that supports the current government regime, specifically the mayor and the Democratic regime that's going on. Because, it runs and is funded largely by abortion. So the government does tie back into it. And yeah, then you're like, government corruption. These are all things I'm supposed to be against as a leftist. And you don't see it until you see it. And once you see it, yeah, like you said, all those layers peel back and you're just like, this is one of the most in-depth human rights atrocities I've ever seen. And that's why I'm so passionately against it. I just feel like if we can't protect our most vulnerable people, the preborn, then we can't protect anyone. We can't save anyone. We can't respect all life until the most vulnerable life is respected. And that's another thing that drove me to be a pro-lifer, was that belief.
Yeah. I love having conversations with people that I probably disagree with ideologically on a lot of different things, but we come together on this one issue. And the reason I love it is because it shows that there's room, whatever your other beliefs about other things, there's room in this movement for you, because we're all coming at it from different angles and different maybe personal motivations. But at the end of the day, we're all coming at it from this position of, we believe life begins at conception and that no one should be subjected to the type of brutality that ends any life, but especially ends life in the womb, in the way that abortion does. So I'm so grateful for all of the work that you do. One thing as we begin to wrap up, I want to ask you about, because you mentioned earlier that you've lost friends over this issue and lost a partner. I think that's something that maybe now even more, that we feel disconnected from people already, kind of post-COVID. That's a real concern for people, and I think it keeps people from speaking out. But what encouragement would you have for someone who maybe is like, I know I need to do something, I'm afraid of losing friends, or I'm afraid of disrupting my social circle? What kind of encouragement would you have for them?
I would say you've got two options. So you can be a sleeper cell and you can argue against abortion without letting people know your position. Or you can start simple and just say, I'm against abortion. I'm not willing to argue about it right now, but maybe in the future we can have a conversation about it and just move forward from there. And you really got to set some firm boundaries on that, and be like, I'm really not going to discuss it right now, guys. Not when you first hear me say it, because you're going to get fired up, you're going to get emotional, you're going to start associating me with all these things about the snobbery that you believe. And then we're just not going to have a productive conversation. So it has to just start with, I need you to know, you know me, and you like me, and I'm also against abortion. And so you, therefore, can like people who are against abortion, and then go from there. And the people who really matter, I've found, tend to stick around. I mean, you say that about all kinds of things in life, like the right people will stick around, but they do. Even with your abortion stance. My best friends have stayed. My closest loved ones have stayed. Even my loved one that has had an abortion, and I was most afraid of losing her, is still very much in contact with me, and we're on good terms, and she doesn't see me as evil at all, and as far as I know. And but I so appreciate her relationship, and so the most important relationships didn't disappear, and you just have to trust that the right people will then come into your life too. You'll attract better energies. You'll meet more people like you once you start coming out as pro-life, and you won't be alone forever. It's lonely at first when you start losing people. It is lonely, but it's so worth it to be liberated in that way, and to meet people who you feel like you can be your whole self around. And that's been worth it for me. So, and you just got to consider what's worth it for you. I mean, by speaking out, you could be saving a life. You don't know that. And so what are you willing to give up? Are you willing to give up a friendship? Are you willing to give up a job? Are you willing to give up some money, some lost economic things? You got to think, what is a life worth to me, and what would I sacrifice to save a life? And so it requires some personal reflection, but I highly recommend it. The more you live in your values, the more you are centered in them, the more affirmed and fulfilled you're going to feel. So again, it's worth it in the end.
Yeah, I love that. That's really solid advice. I love setting boundaries and even saying, like, I don't think we're ready to have this conversation right now, but I need you to know this about me in light of everything else that you know about me, and just kind of guiding people through that. I think that's really wise and a good way to go about it. Elise, I'm so grateful for the work that you do and your time that you spent with us today. Tell us again where people can find you online. Tell us a little bit about where people can find your zine and get connected to the work that you're doing.
Yeah, so online, on Instagram, I'm at anti-personhood. On Tumblr, I'm Secular Pro-Life Conspectus, and anti-personhood is the title of it. And so some other places you can find me, you can find my book on Amazon. That's Rebuilding Pro-Life Nonviolence by John Kavanagh O'Keefe and Elise Ketch. My zine is linked on my Instagram bio, and also is pinned to my my Tumblr page. And then you can find me working with the Center for Medical Progress as a contractor. So I'll be doing some more work with them in the very near future. Then I'm always volunteering with Progressive Anti-Abortion Uprising and Secular Pro-Life. So you'll find some of my work there as well.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Elise, again, for what you do and for being here with us today. I think you have given people a lot of really great things to think about, and hopefully inspired others to join the movement in whatever way that looks like for them.
I hope so. Thank you so much for having me.